high fructose corn syrup, and they've even tried to change the name to glucose.
So a lot of the misinformation regarding HFCS is just based on a misunderstanding of what it actually is. So as you can see here, sucrose, which is pure table sugar, is made up of 50% glucose and 50% fructose that is chemically bonded. This bond is broken in the body so that glucose and fructose are released for absorption. The two most common forms of HFCS are HFCS 42 and HFCS 55. 42 would have 42% fructose, 55 would have 55% fructose, but it's still made up of just glucose and fructose, just like table sugar. Now, a lot of the misinformation is regarding the high fructose part. It is high in fructose to regular corn syrup, which is pure glucose. That's why it's called high fructose corn syrup. People often mistake this with pure fructose. It is not pure fructose. Glucose fructose syrup would be an accurate term and is how it is labeled in Europe. More info in part 2. Okay, so now that we understand what high fructose corn syrup is, does it deserve its toxic status? Its toxic status is based off of rodent studies that are examining the acute toxicity of pure fructose at really, really high levels. Now, this doesn't show that high fructose corn syrup is toxic because 1, we are not rodents. 2, the doses are many, many times higher than we are going to consume. 3, high fructose corn syrup is not pure fructose. It actually contains similar amounts of fructose or even lower amounts than some common other added sugars like honey, sucrose, agave syrup, and even something like coconut sugar. So we can even compare the ratios of glucose to fructose to some other common sugars. Like I said in the other video, regular sucrose is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. HFCS 42 is actually lower in fructose at 0.8, 1.3 for HFCS 55, and honey is at 1.1. Okay, part 3 on high fructose corn syrup. So in part 1 we learned what it is. Part 2 we learned why it doesn't deserve its toxic status. I just want to note as well that something like agave syrup that does not have a bad reputation, as bad as something like high fructose corn syrup, also has a lot more fructose than high fructose corn syrup. But for some reason, it's HFCS that has this horrible reputation. So now let's look at the actual scientific evidence that we have. And indeed, the human studies that show consumption of HFCS versus sugar versus honey show that they exert similar metabolic effects in humans. I'll link a few additional studies in the comments as well. Now, I know at this point sometimes people will claim that it's the food industry conducting these studies and that we can't trust them. While that's not a valid refutation, I just also want to point out that this study was supported by a grant from the National Honey